Hello and welcome back, MC1 Gamer here. Well, I've been away for a little while, and life sometimes gets in the way of your hobbies, and I've had some issues. I'm changing some of my mode of employment. There have been a lot of things going on with my son, who is getting older, but he's away at sleepaway camp now, and I have a lot of time over the rest of the summer to enjoy what is a great momentous occasion for Age of Sigmar, and that is the impending release of the General's Handbook version 2, or as it's titled, 2017, which means we're going to be seeing, as we've already seen in lots of reports, regular iterations of this on an ongoing basis, which means it's going to be basically a living document. So for the last couple of weeks, we've seen just a bit of information after a huge wave of 40K releases and whatnot. And now we're starting to see the little inching back towards Age of Sigmar underneath the shadow of the behemoth that is 40K. And while a lot of my games have, the amount of games that I played is kind of diminished just because of personal reasons, and plus I've been involved in some other gaming aspects. I'm very much geared up and ready to jump back into Age of Sigmar. I never really left, but again, I play an insane amount of Age of Sigmar games. Barely a week can go by that I'm not playing, 2, 3, 4 games. Sometimes, I spend a whole day playing several. I tried out the skirmish just recently, but I'm really dying to get back in Age of Sigmar, and I'm actually looking for more motivation to get me back into the painting that I've been doing. So, well, a lot of the news that has come out in the last couple weeks has been pretty interesting, mostly positive, almost overwhelmingly positive. And I'm very excited about it. And the fact that there's some enhancements that have really been responses to a lot of what the community has put forth to GW, it's even that much more, just proof that we're living in a great and grand time when it comes to not just miniature games, has been spoken on many channels and with many people out there in the community, but also very evident that Games Workshop is really looking to engage with the community and really hear what people's thoughts are. So let's take a look at some of what has changed. I know that last week we had a sneak peek into what's in the General's Handbook, and I'll go over that a little bit in just a minute. But I think if you're tuning in here, you probably have looked at that. You've probably seen a lot of the videos and the stuff on the community page, which I wholeheartedly recommend you check out. Go to the Warhammer community page, whether you're involved in Age of Sigmar or 40K or whatever. That is a great place where you're going to see a lot of just information, not just about the games themselves, which it's, again, this is where you're probably going to see it first, but there's a great calendar there for any events that are coming up in various different parts of the country and world. So if you have an event, I would suggest that you try to put it up on that calendar, because again, that's the absolute best way to do it. A lot of people are using Facebook forums and Twitter, but why not go to the source? There's a community page that they're providing for us. So let's go take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and share my page, and we're going to take a look at what came out today, and then I'll I'll throw back to what came out last week, and I can talk about that, because again, it's most recent, and I think most people want to talk about, wait, what's the latest news? So here we go. This page was released earlier today, and it's titled Balanced, Diverse, Fun Matched Play in the General's Handbook. Now, there's a lot of rules that people have discussed and sometimes inquired about, and there have been various different types of views about the interpretations of those rules, mainly things like certain abilities and effects stacking. The rules of one have helped change that, really reeled in certain things. Some I think went a little bit too far. I think personally, and I voiced this, I think the rule of one for spells kind of hurts certain armies and helps others a little bit too much. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be that way forever. Who knows? Maybe they'll tweak that a little bit further. I think some war scrolls and some powers and abilities may need to be adjusted to accommodate that, because it makes certain things unplayable. But we may be seeing a lot more changes coming up in the next few weeks when this new General's Handbook comes out that may accommodate that we haven't seen yet. These are just leaks that have come out. No, they're not actually leaks. They're their information that the James Workshop has willfully thrown out there for us just to give sneak peeks is probably the better way to describe it. So we can speculate a lot about different things, but let's talk about what we know. All right, there's several different rules of one, and we're going to talk about these two editions in particular. The first one, again, if you can't read it, I can try and go ahead and zoom in a little bit, but I'm going to read it for you because I'm sure that if you're here, you're loving the sound of my voice more than I'm sure with my my face that's been made for radio. So the first one is the fourth rule of one, and that is where you cannot re-roll or modify the roll of the start of each battle round that determines who chooses the player that takes the first turn. There is a lot of chatter going on since this hit today. I have been communicating over Twitter and Facebook and instant messenger text with a lot of people that have reached out to me because I, to great effect, very successfully, you have utilized the Coven Throne with my Death Army, which I converted up very heavily in the Bretonian, colors and theme, where it has this ability to on ties for turn order where you win, and that is a modification in some respects. But is it? There's been a lot of conversation about that, and a lot of you people, I would just be careful with your language and tone, please. It's easy to misunderstand that stuff over the internet, I know. But let's just dial the rhetoric down a little bit. But let's really just look at it and kind of just explore this. That ability specifically doesn't modify a roll. You're not getting a +1 to your roll. All it says is that you win the turn if there is a tie. So it kind of still works. It's still viable in matched play. Now, I can see some of people's point of view. I'm not, I've been wrong about things before, and quite a few times and quite dramatically. But in this case, I kind of feel like things like the Coven Throne absolutely would still work given this rule, because it's not a modification of +1 or -1 or whatever. There are other abilities out there, and I think this is something that can be further explored. I'm slated to be on Warhammer Weekly this coming Wednesday, so maybe this is a topic that will come up. I love bouncing these things past Tom more than anything else, because Tom and we have a lot of dialogue about rules and strategies, and he's really good at dissecting this stuff. And I think he's a great litmus test for any rules. I think this is the kind of thing that would probably be a topic there. If not, then maybe I'll do a video with him. If Vince has other stuff on his agenda, but I think there's other things obviously out there. Like I know that the Fire Slayers have I think it's a battalion or a battle, some effect from a battalion. I don't know if that's been removed in the new GHB or if it's been modified, but also let's also consider that whatever that circumstance is, even if it's neutered in match play, it's also a battalion. It's not like you can choose not to take that battalion, and there are alternatives, and maybe that's why there's more battalions for Fire Slayers. But when you take a unit, whether it be infantry, a behemoth, a monster, or a character, you're getting points costs inherent to that unit, and it's not like you could choose not to take that, just like not taking the battalion. But if there's a cornerstone to your army, like a Coven Throne, in my opinion, I think it's a little bit different rather than an overlay like a battalion, as opposed to an element that's part of a subfaction where there's not a vast array of options even. But this particular subfaction seems to, as well as many others, could be getting a lot more love. So who knows what's going to happen? Maybe we even see some war scroll changes or updates. So let's go further to the next one. This next one is the rule of one. The fifth of the rules of one is called no artifacts of power or similar items can be taken more than once in the same army. For example, the army cannot include 2 obsidian blades. Now, I love this rule because the idea of ability spamming and item spamming, things like that, this is my personal view, and you can, you're certainly free to disagree with me. Many of you do on many of the many topics. But my personal feeling and philosophy is I like some diversity. I don't like oversaturating a game with too much of anything. When I don't like more of the same, and I've never really liked the idea of the stacking abilities going to the nth degree. I do like some of them, but when it comes to the same item, that really bugs me. And the idea of if you get 2 or 3 items that everybody just takes the same ones, and you see the same ones all the time. and the redundancy can have an impact on the game as well, because when you might have eliminated this one enemy that has this item that's plaguing you and it's part of the strategy, and all of a sudden, well, there's another one, there's a backup. I like the idea of it being a Highlander type aspect. There can be only one. It's precious, it's important, it's an artifact. And I think that a lot of people that I've played with in a lot of the events that I've gone on have been playing this way anyway, but clearly because the rule was not specifically spelled out, it needed to be clarified, and now it's further clarified. It's a specific rule of one. So it is paramount to your list building now that you only take one of any one artifact, and that means you're gonna have to be a little more creative. And just from the way it was described in the article, there's a lot more artifacts that are out there that they've been introducing with all of the allegiances that they're fleshing out. So there's going to be plenty of options, and you have to pick and choose and be a little smarter about it. You can't just keep taking the one great, awesome thing that was part of your strategy before and have backups. Okay, so we're going to move on a little bit. The next thing is the topic is something that the GW kind of hinted at a little bit earlier in the week, which was the idea of benefits for Horde armies. And I love Horde armies, and I'm just going to pull this up here where they talk about certain benefits here. This is one of the things that we've seen with the evolution of Warhammer in general, is that you have this push-pull from large, enormous armies with huge volume of units, and sometimes these either monsters or small elite powerful units. And the game has evolved so much over the years, since there was a time when I first started playing, which was back in the 80s, where a unit of 20 was a solid block of troops on the table. And then it moved over the course of time in later editions where you could have 40, 50, 100 in a unit, depending on the army, depending on points values and power and overriding rules. That really these Death Stars, they coined the frame Death Star from this, would just be impossible to defeat or take forever, where it was just inconsequential to even engage them. And that really had an impact on the game for better or for worse. With Age of Sigmar, there are a number of war scrolls, as many of you I'm sure are aware of, that have these accelerator values where you get over a certain point, either at 20, 30, whatever, and you get the benefit of having that volume. But when you have a match play environment, and once we saw the General's Handbook 1 come out, where points came in, and the tournament match play structure limited what you could take just based on a points environment, open play still available. You still have a lot of options, a lot of freedom in that if you play open play. But a lot of the people I know play match play, even if they do it in a casual sense, just to give it some more structure. It seems to be the default method. And while I lament some of the things that were lost in open play, even as much as I was an advocate for a lot of those play styles and a lot of those cool rules, like the deployment game of chicken, there's something about this structure of the game that just works with people and resonates with people, so you can't deny it. And the limitation in the way the GHB1 came incorporated was that a lot of these massive or large armies, they had caps, and there was a lot of inhibition to deploy those types of units. There was a propensity for people to try to get the cheapest value, the most garbage units they could for their battle line requirement, pay that battle line tax, like the old core tax, and then try to get as much of the elite units or monsters or characters as they could to make the most efficient army possible. And while I feel that there's benefits and disadvantages, even in that environment, to having large units and elite units and whatnot, I've always said that the way to really compete is not just list build with your list in mind necessarily. It's with the scenarios in mind and a spectrum of scenarios, many different environments that you have, many different objectives and that you need to prepare for, because in a tournament environment, you don't know what you're going to be facing. You don't know what scenario is going to be rolled up. There could be unique scenarios with many different layers of objectives that you need to achieve. And if you're not prepared for a variety of different options, then you may really power through one particular game and just slow your opponent, but you're going to have certain situations where your list is not going to work. The monster mash is not going to work. The heavy character, the heavy caster, the heavy shooty list, all these things, they may not work in certain situations where you may need more mobility or some long-range support, or there's a lot of terrain on the table that blocks line of sight. Certain things that really could come into play that you can't predict. So you need diversity in a spectrum. And what has been lost in a lot of ways is that horde mentality. Some people have accommodated it, but we've seen a growth of individual models with more wounds in units. We've seen that with all of the new armies. You see, like Iron Jaws, everything there has got multiple wounds. You see that with Stormcast, the beloved Stormcast of Age of Sigmar, where, or maybe not so beloved, but all their units are at least 2 wounds and up. And that makes the model count smaller and the units a little bit more hardy. But what happens is there's a trade-off there. They're going to be more expensive. They're going to be, if they do die, it's going to be, you're going to lose, if you have battle shock issues, you're going to lose those very valuable models much more quickly. But we haven't seen a lot of strength in these vast armies that we saw in previous editions of Warhammer, or they're just rare. I'll put out, for instance, a 90 zombie army with 3 units of 30 or more. I've done it a couple of times, or you see the big skeleton from Death Rattle, which actually is a very hard one to manage in terms of moving all your units and all the dice that you're throwing. But it has some some killer power and some depth. But it's just a lot of models, and some people may not want to move all those models, but it does have some power. But you just don't see a lot of armies. The Skaven armies have gotten smaller. The Orc armies have gotten smaller just because there hasn't been a lot of incentive. Well, I'm taking a long way to get to this point, but let's get to, and there's many other issues, and I'm sure that people in the chat and in the comments are going to talk about them and discuss the merits, so feel free. But I love the idea that they're trying to incent people, or incentivize, I'm not sure which is the proper word, but they're trying to give people a little bit of a reward for trying to get bigger armies, because those are interesting. Certainly the mid and small sized units can be very interesting. But when you have these large, vast armies on the table, it really looks interesting. And let's also be honest, one of the things I've been an advocate for since Age of Sigmar first came out is something that people don't talk about enough, and that is the strategies that counter and neuter and even eliminate certain abilities, and ways that you can stop certain things that everybody used to whine and complain about and still do that's out of control. Things like summoning and crazy deployments and weird movement shenanigans, which is board control. There are a lot of proximity issues. There are a lot of proximity rules that will limit what you can do, where you can go, that will limit mobility of heavily mobile armies. And what is the best way to counter that? Well, yeah, you can hope that there's a lot of terrain on the table that can impede a lot of that stuff. Block line of sight, have issues like the Sylvaneth Wildwood on where where you land on movement, or if you charge. All those different things can come into play. But you might not be able to control a lot of that stuff. You can control the size of your army based on how you build your list. And if you have 100 skeletons, or rather I should say, because maximums are in play, if you have a unit of 60 skeletons, that's going to control a good swath of the board. And they all have to be within an inch of each other, but still, think of the bubble wrapping thing is probably going to become even more of a thing as a result. But you have a couple of units like that, you're going to take up a quarter or half or a third of the table, and that can really have an impact on your ability to deny your opponents where they go, what they do. You can protect your characters or units that are that could be subject to maybe a limited range of attacks from spells and magic, or just prevent somebody from taking back an objective that you've taken. So there's a lot that can be done. I'm sure we could talk about strategies and how you utilize these things to your advantage. I don't see it done enough, but people more and more are doing on great blogs, on the community pages and whatnot, and videos. We see a lot of this stuff being, over the course of the last several years, more and more we're seeing that, and that's great. And I think we need more of that, because that's where you get to the real advanced and expert level of Age of Sigmar. But now when we see these benefits for a large army, I really feel that this is a fantastic thing to promote this type of play and expand and enhance where Age of Sigmar is going to be going, because some people just really enjoy playing with those large armies, and there hasn't been as much incentive to do so. There's been actually a lot of disincentive because of how the battle line works and because of what the options were for various armies. Now you get a benefit where if you get to the maximum, you get a point cost. And I don't know if this is every unit. I don't know how. We don't know yet all the details. All we know is what we see here, and in terms of the point cost, if you go to the maximum value of clan rats, you're going to pay a different amount versus what you would pay otherwise. You're getting basically a 40-point break, because you're going to pay 240 points for every 10 iteration of clan rats. But if you take it up to the 40, well, look, my math's going to be horribly off here. Somebody else do the math for me, because math for me is hard. And I'm trying to get to my points as opposed to wallow in the specifics here. But the bottom line is that you're going to see a cost break, a price break, as you go to the maximums. And I believe they actually did illustrate that it is a 40-point break if you go to the maximum amount that you could take for clan rats. But that's however that math works out with all the other units, all the other war scrolls. We'll just have to wait till the Games Workshop releases the General's Handbook, and we'll be going over that. I'll be going over that. I'm sure everybody in the community is going to be analyzing that to death, and that's part of the fun. So, but it's nice to see that that's the case, that you'll get a little bit of a break if you do that. And I like the idea that you have to achieve the maximum. So if I put down a unit of zombies, if I'm going to put down the minimum unit, the minimum amount, which I believe is 20, if I remember correctly, well, that's great. I'm paying the same cost per a static amount per guy. But if I go and pay for 60 of them and I get a cost break, well, the value of each of those zombies becomes that much better. And frankly, a lot of these units have abilities that are improved, that they're better when they get to these higher numbers. And that you get situations like, for instance, skeletons that get more attacks. You get some units that give you more pluses. And because I just have the Death Faction on my mind, even though I have 5 different armies that I'm collecting and painting at the moment, what happens is you get sometimes situations where there's that weird quantity break where it just doesn't make sense for you to get that unit of greater value. And I always think about, for instance, the Graveguard versus Skeletons. Graveguard are much more cost effective at lower numbers, 10s, maybe even up to 20s, where they're just inherently better per model, even though they're more costly. But when you get to like 30 or 40 skeletons, the accelerators they get for the larger numbers actually makes them a better value, just in terms of stats, just because of the accelerators they get, the benefits they get, the amount of that they recover is die 6 versus die 3. They get more attacks. Their profiles are fairly similar. The armor saves are negligible. I think it's only 1 worse. Bottom line is these are the types of things you're going to see across a number of different armies that have a horde element. And there's more to that I'm going to speak to about that when I talk about the allies, which I know a lot of people talked about last week, but I didn't get a video out there for that. So I'll just hit upon that in just a minute. Let me go and move on to the next thing, and that is they're just giving an example here, and I'm loving that they did it for Dark Elves, or however you want to call them right now, elves. But there's a lot of players that we just don't see a lot of these armies that were so prevalent in previous editions because they just haven't gotten a lot of love yet in Age of Sigmar. Well, a lot of these, maybe they're not going to get a battle tome, but we saw with the first adjustment of War Scrolls when they released them with the compendium lists and whatnot when AOS first released. But some of them just haven't gotten a lot of. They've been left behind in a lot of ways with the new armies and updates. You're not seeing as many of standard dispossessed dwarves, Dwarden, because Fire Slayers have taken it over. A lot of people were playing Tomb Kings because they were just better point for point than a lot of the Death Faction. But Death Faction has fallen behind in a lot of ways because there have been the release of a lot of other armies that are just doing a lot of what they do better, or just outpacing them in terms of the spell ability, like the Tzeentch, for example. And it goes much further. You see, Quadrant Overlords, much better shooty army than a lot of the other armies that can be considered shooty armies. But even so, we haven't seen a lot of things like the traditional Dark Elves. Well, with the new GHB, as was illustrated last week, they're going to be releasing allegiance abilities for all of, or the vast majority, not all of them, but the vast majority of these sub-factions, which are going to probably make them much more viable and hopefully a little more competitive, and we'll see them on the table more. Could we be seeing some sweet, diamonds in the rough where the new hierarchy changes because of some of these rules? I'll bet you that we're going to, at least as the meta changes, every time a new book is released, new rules are updated, new armies are introduced, I'm sure that we're going to see a changing of the guard over time. But what I love is that they're showing this stuff here in this way. And one of the benefits that were needed was things like battle line options, more battle line options. If you are allegiant, so the battle line if comes into play. And the idea that the Daughters of Cain can take options like Doomfire Warlocks or Sisters of Slaughter, that's a real big boon for them. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of that, and I cannot wait to see it. We've seen a little bit of that in the foreshadowing that we saw last week, and we're probably going to see a whole lot more. I'm going to talk really a little bit quickly about this, this new... let's see if I can go pull it up. This battle battalion. Let's see if I have this here. Well, of course, I'll have to show you my ugly desktop. Let's see if I can pull it up. This, let's see if we can get this out here. No, we can't. Can we? Nope. This battalion... let me just paraphrase this battalion. I actually had a copy of this where I could pull it up and actually read the whole thing. But you go ahead into the website and go read it yourself, and you'll see some of the details. But let's just talk about this in particular. This is called the Duality of Death, and this is one of, I believe, 6 new missions, new scenarios that are being released with the new GHB2 or GHB 2017. Now, the thing that I like about this the most is that it provides us with a specific victory point objective that we haven't seen really that much before. When I mentioned before about you need to build your lists to cover a variety of different types of objectives, so that you have different types of war scrolls that achieve different goals, that have different strengths and weaknesses. This is one of the ones that makes me very happy. We've seen ones where the largest number of models within a certain range of an objective wins that objective. We've seen some where heroes are very important. A hero can take the objective. A hero has to take that objective only. So you have to get that hero off the mark. We haven't seen a lot that's really behemoth oriented. This one is a hero or a behemoth, and I think that's extremely important. You've got these 2 objectives, middle of the board on either side. I'm very partial when there's 3, because a lot of times you can build lists where you can send your 2 largest groups of your army into 2 directions. But when you have a third, you really got to make a choice. Where are you going to heavy up on what side of the board? But what's nice about this is that this is only a hero can take the objective, and only a hero can being that only a behemoth can take an objective, meaning that if you have somebody who takes it within 3 inches of that, it's one thing to destroy that enemy, but that unit that is within proximity that may have done the damage, if it's a standard rank and file unit, a flyer or whatever, if it's a tie-up unit or a unit that you try to wither the enemy down through attrition, because maybe it's a Horde army and you're not worried about taking losses, if there's not a replacement there that you can put into place, you can't take that objective back. You may be able to deny your opponent, but you've got to be considering taking your objective. Maybe you shoot that behemoth or hero that your enemy off, or whether it could be artillery, could be whatever. But you need to have and include in your army enough with these keywords in order to be able to retake that objective. So it's not just denial. In order to win, you need to have a spectrum. Now, heroes is easy, but there's a lot of armies that don't have a lot of heroes that are not also behemoths. Like, for instance, the Beastclaw Raiders. They have a lot of mounted heroes. Yes, you could take the hunters, certainly, but everything else is on a Stonehorn or a Thundertusk. It is a very small model count, large creature army that would greatly benefit from this. And there's a lot of scenarios where they wouldn't, where they really couldn't win because they just had to do so much damage and survive long enough against larger volume units. And in some cases they would and they could, but traditionally they wouldn't and they couldn't, and they would lose. They would win the war of killing, but they would lose the scenario. And there's a lot of different ways that people built lists to try and, combine them with other destruction units, like, Moonclan, Grots, and stuff like that. But we've seen a lot of very interesting and creative ways that people have used to overcome those limitations. But this gives you at least the validity that if you have a smaller model count, more elite army, that there's a scenario out there that still benefits that. So what I love about this newest release, more than anything else, this newest information that they've released to us, is that they're giving a little bit to whatever your mindset is. Here are some cost benefits if you like big horde armies. Here's a scenario that really benefits the hero heavy or monster heavy army. You can achieve that with an army that's not a Beastclaw Raiders type, where it's all, there's a lot of large, big walls of flesh. But the bottom line is that it seems like they're looking to balance that out and provide various different ways to win and more ways that you have to think about this. I want to hit upon one thing before I turn off, and that is the last year's information, which is the General's Handbook. I have some concerns, but they're just overshadowed completely by all the amazing, positive, and good stuff. And I know a lot of this stuff has been talked about over the past week or so. There's been speculation about compendium armies that, eliminating them could be a barrier entry for older players. I completely agree with that. I hope that we still see some of those compendium units and armies still maybe folded into this the listing here. If they're not, hey, there's also the viewpoint that it doesn't mean it's disallowed. It's still in print. There's still points. It's still in the app. It's just a matter of the TOs making the decisions and you locally. I'm not terribly concerned about that, but it would, I think it would be cool to keep those armies in play. Obviously, over time, newer releases just eventually just become shinier and newer and more interesting. The thing that I'm interested in is this the allies, and the allies. I have two more points I want to make before I end the show. Allies are going to take list building to a whole new level. The ability for you to take 400 points of allies in Battle Host. This is a very poignant number, but the ability to do that is going to provide a spectrum of change of list building that I think is going to make a lot of the previous meta, it's just going to turn it on its head. There are some armies that were already doing very well. They were the Apex armies, top of the list. And now if they did have any weaknesses, they can kind of fill in that gap. But there are some armies, and granted, if they were in the lead before, they're still in the lead. Not much has changed in terms of just capability and prowess, and just really just the stronger army. But factions that really needed a little bit of help now have the ability to bring in stuff and provide a diversity that they didn't have before. And I think that's important. And if we confirm, which we will, I'm sure, within the next week or two, that even within these allies, if they fulfill the general battle line function of the Grand Alliance that they're in, because you're limited to taking these from a Grand Alliance, that would be a huge benefit. I think that would be a massive boon. You could take armies like Sylvaneth that have some serious weaknesses and supplement them with stuff from other parts of the Grand Alliance order. You could do the same thing with certain armies that they just maybe, like, for instance, the Dispossessed army that doesn't have any giant monsters. Well, now you can maintain your allegiance, and maybe you could take a Fire Slayer Magmadroth, or as was discussed recently on Warhammer Weekly, Vince and Tom mentioned it. You take a monster from Forge World. You take one of the monsters are now a thing again. They were always a thing, but some people shy off them. They don't like them. They have a bad taste in their mouth about them. Well, guess what? Maybe now you can do it. And the thing that I'm excited the most is one of the biggest issues with, for instance, Nighthaunt, one of the death subfactions that I love and I have a bunch of, and I've only played once. That does pretty well in tournaments play, but it has a big limitation. The only way that you could have a caster is if you if you gave it an artifact to your Banshee or Cairn Wraith, which was awful, and you couldn't even bring in a Mortis engine, which you would think it's a kind of an ethereal type looking thing. You couldn't even bring that in to help you, which just looked like it belongs there. You couldn't do that because it would break the faction. You wouldn't be able to get the benefits of some of your battle line. Well, now you can, and you can create better themes and more interesting themes, or pick up some of the disadvantages. You can kind of fill those holes. So you can take some necromancers or casters or a Mortarch to supplement your Night Haunt. I'm looking forward to a lot of the things that you can do with that. And of course, even though I think the War Scroll, and it's widely accepted that the Black Coach is just an awful War Scroll, it really needs a rewrite and some help. It's built and it's batteried based on casting power, and if you have no wizards in your army, then there's certainly no incentive to use it, even if it had a better chart of what it could get as you know, throughout the game, as more and more of that effect, which is again derived from casting spells within range of various wizards. If you have wizards, yes, then maybe it's more workable or usable. Its current iteration, maybe not so much, but you know, there's hope. There's hope. But even so, this provides a depth of list building and capability that we just have not seen to date. We have seen a lot of, not cookie cutter, but a lot of the same, because if it's tried and it's proven, people just throw it out there. I always try to go against the norm. And a lot of people have seen me play. I've been fortunate enough that, you know, I've had really good success with going against mold. I just don't like to have the same thing that the net lists. You know, sometimes I try them as a goof, but if I go into a tournament, I want to know that I did better because of my prowess rather than just my list building. Not to say that I don't build as effective lists as I can, but I try to do something that's non-standard or different, or at least more unique, that we don't see 5 or 10 of, you know, or one at every table. And the allies, I think, is going to allow for that uniqueness, that specialness, that your own personal stamp, even more than what we've seen before. Yes, we're going to see some of the same stuff over and over again. Yes, there's going to be some obvious defaults. As has been said multiple times, that Celestial Hurricanum is going to be a big thing. I'm sure we're going to see some big monsters in Chaos that are going to be supplementing some of these other some of these armies that, you know, they may give a little extra punch, you know, hand to hand with a shooty version of you know, Tzeentch magic and shooting and mobility matched with Khorne, you know, up in your face and, you know, kill. That's going to be, you know, that's going to be interesting. But I'm also looking forward to some of the other diversity with, you know, combining some of the Death faction, you know, Flesh Eater Courts with other stuff, for instance. To, you know, one or the other being the dominant one, taking allies from other elements for the faction. I think that's really going to help the game, and it's going to make things more interesting, and it's going to help mean that you're going to have different lists that you're going to have to be prepared for, and that can only help the game. So and the most important thing I like is that it creates the excitement of kind of a new reset for Age of Sigmar. And what I mean by that is when Age of Sigmar first came out, it was that exhilarating thing for those of us who weren't, you didn't have nerd rage and, you know, weren't, you know, children in grown up bodies. But for the rest of us who had a little bit of a level head, even gave it a try before freaking out, there was that exhilaration of something new, and we were trying to test it out and see. It was that excitement. When the General's Handbook 1 came out, that really kind of laid a new foundation and direction for the game that have changed the trajectory, vast majority for the better, for the game. And look where it's come since then. And with these new adjustments and rules, I really believe that we're going to be seeing a whole new. It's almost like the next stage of a rocket. You know, if you've ever seen the Atlas or Saturn rockets, you know, that one stage kind of breaks away as it's breaking away from orbit, and it kind of floats away after it discharges. But then the next engine kicks in, and it just sends it that much forward and faster and further out into orbit and out into space. This is the General's Handbook 2017. I believe is going to be that. I really believe it's going to be that. I want to say one more thing, because I see that some of the mentions in the chat, and that is about the Night Haunts have an ability that they talked about in one of the recent articles, and that is where they could do something really cool, which is a special movement ability in the midst of the table, where you can deploy them off table and bring them into the table 9 inches away from the enemies. Unfortunately, there's only one thing that I had any negative about. Unfortunately, it's linked to having a character from the Night Haunts on the table at the time, and that is a Cairn Wraith or a Banshee. Not very powerful units, not really efficient for their cost. Unfortunately, you have to have these alive on the table in order for that special deployment to work. And as anyone knows, if you don't get first turn, those really good shooty armies or armies with good deep strike capabilities can wipe off or snipe out your characters really easily. And unless you have an abundance of them, you're not going to be able to use this ability. And yes, you could try to hide that one character in a building or away from view or whatever, but you know what? I don't see, and again, we didn't see the whole text of that sheet. I don't see that there's an ability for for you to use those points, not lose them, in the same way as summoning points are lost if you lose all your wizards. If you have nobody that can cast the spell to bring those guys in, they're gone. Those points are dead, and I hate that rule. That's, you know, since the GHB 1. I really hope that the GHB 2017 is going to have a rule that it allows you, if you lose all tangible tethers to bringing in units that you've placed off to the side, to be able to come in. Maybe on a board edge. It doesn't have to be the same rules. Some limitation, some detriment, but not lose all those points. If you took 500 points in stuff that's off to the side, for whatever their special deployment rules are, and whatever allowed them to get onto the table is destroyed in that first turn, which is entirely possible. I hate the idea that you're not allowed to get them. Even if it's a roll, you got to roll a 5 or a 6 and they can come on a board edge, something. Give a chance for that stuff to come back on, for each of those units to come back on, and not have them completely lost, because the risk to reward is not worth it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. That would clinch it for me in terms of not just the potential for losing summoning points, but also for the special deployment aspects, like we're seeing with the new Night Haunt rule, because then you're not worried as much that, hey, if I take a chance on having this cool mechanic, I'm not, you know, if it doesn't work, I'm dead. The whole game is done. You could basically lose turn 1 like that, because those a half or a third or a quarter of your army is gone. And you know, I just don't look at that as fun. I like the risk element, but the detriment is too steep if they don't put that in. And I've always felt that way about the summoning. So we might be seeing a lot of differences. We've only been seeing sneak peeks into this stuff. Certainly there's going to be a lot more coming, and I'm looking forward to it. I think it's just another one of those really exciting times for Age of Sigmar, and bravo to GW. You know, look, August is now here, tomorrow. But it can't be soon enough before we get this book, if you're an Age of Sigmar fan, to see where the next stage of this game is going to go. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, and have a great day.